Good morning, and welcome to the second in our political science campaign and election panel series. This one is going to focus on the psychological analysis of campaigns. I'm Dr. Emily Stacy. I am a political science professor, obviously here. Most of you know that because you're in my 11 o'clock government class. So thank you for being here. Please sign up front for credit, right? We're really excited to have this panel put together to have this conversation. Obviously, we're a couple of weeks out from the incredibly important midterm elections. This one has been extremely contentious in the state of Oklahoma. Before we get started, I want to do my normal displays of gratitude and affection, of course, to Connie Myrick and Anita Bowles-Inslee, and of course their wonderful team, John Shackelford, you've got Kim back there taking pictures of us, etc. They make us accessible and make these events available to us on campus and find us places to have these conversations. So thank you guys so much for doing so. To my friends in the faculty who are here, like Dr. B, sitting prominently in the front row, for being here, number one, to support these conversations in civic discourse, but also for incentivizing you students to be here as well. And of course, a huge thank you to our panel for being here as well and sharing your expertise. So as I mentioned, the 2022 midterm elections are less than a month out. And it has been an unusually contentious season, specifically for the state of Oklahoma. Just this week, we're starting to get picked up in national politics over our gubernatorial race specifically, which is why Associate Dean Davenport in the middle there, and I had the foresight, to organize these conversations in the spring of 2022. We kind of saw this going in a weird direction for the state of Oklahoma and thought that these conversations would be useful back in the spring. So we kind of anticipated the crazy, and boy, did it deliver. So we've got an incumbent Republican governor running neck and neck with a dino, right? A Democrat in name only. Yes, that's my trademark, thank you. Challenger for his job in October. This is strange for Oklahoma politics. Indications that predominantly rural conservatives are going to break with their party, at least in the superintendent's race, and the curious infusion of national, quote, woke liberal politics in hyper-local races like your state treasurer's race, for example. So it's really been quite the year for our state in terms of electoral politics. So before we get to the nuts and bolts, I want to ask our panelists to very briefly introduce yourselves to our audience. If we can start with you, Mr. McFerrin.
Okay. I'm Pat McFerrin. I am a political hack, for lack of a better term.
I called you a guru, so.
I prefer hack.
Okay.
I've been doing, got my first paycheck for delivering signs back in 1986, so only a few people alive then in the room. So I've been doing this for a long time. We poll all across the country, and that's really where my spot is.
My turn?
Yes, it's your turn.
I'm James Davenport. I'm probably the least distinguished panelist up here today. I am the Associate Dean for our Social Sciences and have been around maybe not quite as long, or at least active quite as long as Pat, but have been around Oklahoma politics quite a bit and been able to be involved in some political campaigns and such, and have found that this year is pretty interesting here in the state, as opposed to some years where things just go kind of as you would expect them. So I'm very excited to talk about that and to get some insights from my other two panelists on why things are as interesting as they are in Oklahoma. So.
I'm Lizzie Boker. I am one of Richmond College's psychology faculty and the designated non-political science person on our panel. In fact, my major interest in politics is as a voter, not so much as a strategist or an analyst. My 18th birthday, I asked my mother to take me to register to vote. So this has been something that has been a pretty big part of my life, but again, not from an academic standpoint. But I do have an intense interest in surveys. In fact, James and I have been talking off and on about surveys for public opinion pretty much since we started working full time. Remember that?
I do.
It was Actually, we sat on panels about this. So my role here today is to just talk about how surveys work, some of the challenges, and some of the cognitive factors involved in how people think about the materials they're looking at when they're looking at advertising.
Excellent. Really excited about this. So we're going to start with polling the public. So I'm curious, what are the major challenges involved in conducting public opinion polls to gauge candidate or issue support?
Well, I mean, it changes all the time. It's always been a challenge. The tough part is just really the science side of it is identifying the appropriate universe, getting those people to respond, and then the tough thing there. Fortunately, in Oklahoma, it's pretty easy. It's actually easier to survey voters than market research because we have a definitive list. We know who the voters are. We have a definitive list of who actually participates and who actually votes as opposed to just registers. And so we can actually, in Oklahoma, it's a state that we can actually do that very well. The real challenge, I have a call center in Moore. I've got about 65 employees. I'll pitch out here at about $15 an hour. If anybody wants a part-time job, let me know. We call and ask people their opinions. And what you have to do is, one, get through spam filters. Two, convince them you're not selling something. But once you have people like to express their opinions. And so once you get past that, they like to talk, and they like to talk way too long. But we collect all that data we can and then put it together. But it seems like every generation or every cycle, there seems to be some new challenge. At one time it was that we couldn't get everybody's phone numbers, and then we couldn't get everybody's cell phone numbers, and we couldn't dial cell phone numbers, and that's changed. And now we have them complete them through text to web. I don't do it. There are some that go to social media. To me, the Facebook proliferation is not extensive enough, like cell phones are now. So I don't like that method. But it's really just about doing the science side to make sure that you're getting accurate representation. We bug people to death. We try to call every phone number at least 7 times, but we're still at a rate of about 30 phone numbers to get one response. Other pollsters are over 100. So it's tough these days.
The thing that fascinates me about, the challenge to polling is writing good questions, right? Writing them in a way that it's clear what you're asking, and there's not a lot of room for interpretation, either on the side of the person receiving the survey or on the side of the person who's gathering that data and trying to make sense of what they got. And I think a lot of times people don't appreciate just how challenging it can be to write a good question and to get a response that's going to tell you something. And so when I'm looking at surveys, that's probably one of the first things I go is, what did they ask? And I'm sure Pat could speak to this more than I could, but you can ask the same question in a couple of different ways and get very different responses from doing that. And so I think that to me is always something that's quite interesting. It's just,
if I could build on that just
Sure.
a second, it's not always just the question; it's the answers as well.
right.
Answers lead people there, and whenever I'm training my folks, I express to them how important it is they read all the answers. And what I say is, I'm going to go buy pizza, and we'll just do a little poll here if I can with everybody.
Yeah.
So I'm going to buy everybody pizza for lunch. So let me see a show of hands on who wants green pepper pizza and who wants cheese pizza. Okay, who wants green pepper pizza? Who wants cheese? All right. Now if I ask, okay, your choices are pepperoni, cheese, green pepper, supreme. How many people want supreme? How many people want green pepper? How many people want cheese? See, it changes based on what responses you're allowed to give. And so those closed-ended questions can really change what a survey looks like.
The alternatives they're presented with
Correct.
can change their perception of what they
Dr. Boger, I know that survey design, question design is your favorite, so
It
please.
is one of mine. And to build off what they said, it's great to have options until you add too many options. And so if you only have 2 options for a political poll, it better be a pretty simple question. Having a few more options usually does elicit better answers, but if you make too many answer options, people tend to drift into one particular part of your answers, simply because it's like going to the store or going to the pizza shop to order something and there's 50 or 60 or 70 choices. You give up and you just go with what's most familiar. Another thing I was going to mention is it is, as James and I have had conversations about, it's important to write a question that everybody reads and reads the same way. You also have to make sure that your question actually is about what you want to measure. And that's, again, where question wording is really important because you may think you're measuring one topic, but you actually find you're measuring something else. And then you have great answers to the question you didn't think you were asking. And that limits the utility of it.
Absolutely.
And people have to be capable of answering and willing to answer. And I think part of this is what Pat runs into when he's doing these phone surveys is a lot of people don't want to answer. And occasionally you'll have topics that people don't want to answer honestly. Hopefully with political polling you don't run into that too often, but you do. And sometimes people are willing to tell you they don't want to answer it, but a lot of times they'll just pick an answer. And then you're stuck with bad data that you don't know is bad data.
I think she threw it back to me on that.
Well, actually, I have more,
Are you
but
giving me eyebrows? I'm not sure how to do that.
I have more, but as a professor, I can keep talking.
Yes, I know that. We'll move on to question 2 and let you fill in the blanks elsewhere. So question 2, what is the utility of public opinion polls? I think you guys kind of touched on this a little bit, but both for campaigns and for news consumers, particularly, with Dr. Berger's last point, that people may be, especially as we saw in 2016, for example, may be reluctant to actually answer or respond the way that they are intending to vote or on the way that they actually feel on these issues. So again, what is the utility of public opinion polls for both the campaigns and for news consumers? What are their limitations, and do consumers recognize those limitations?
Well, the easy one is the last part. No.
Okay.
They don't recognize limitations. And the one thing I would say, especially when you look at publicly released polls and different things there, is you're not always getting the raw data. You're getting a data reflection of whatever the pollster thought the model should be. There was I think it was in the 2016 election, a New York Times, where they gave 40 different pollsters the same data set, and they came up with, I think it was 36 different responses for what they thought that data said. And that's probably my biggest frustration with the polling industry right now, is I think they let models guide their polling instead of polling guide their models. We use a dynamic system where we know who's participating, who's willing to participate, who's not, and so it changes our quotas as we continue to do the survey, as we gauge interest in different areas there. And so, my polls will change a little bit. I mean, right now in Oklahoma, I'm having a tremendous interest, especially among women, wanting to participate and engage in polling right now. So I'm changing my model a little bit to reflect that, especially college-educated women. We're seeing that interest peak a little bit here. So, but I could be stayed and just keep with my model that I have. It's based purely on history, but it would show you a different result.
Well, and having a model that has, say, a large number of college-educated women isn't inherently a problem. It really depends on if you're doing a public opinion poll or a pre-election poll, because you can tweak your model for an opinion poll, but opinion polls are measuring attitudes, say, now. The problem with pre-election polls is they're not polling, and they say they're polling an attitude, but they're really trying to poll a future behavior that hasn't happened yet. And so that's where you don't actually know who's going to vote in the election until they vote. And so you're trying to ask a question before an election that, in a sense, you're really going to have a firm answer after the election. And so that's where you can sometimes see really big discrepancies between who actually answered the question and who voted, and it's harder to adjust your model as compared to just a straight public opinion poll where you're not actually asking somebody, what are you going to do, so much as what do you think?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. On the campaign side, let's say if I'm a candidate and I'm running for office, and I hire Pat to do polling for me, there's a very specific targeted group of folks that I care about, and that's the folks we think that are actually going to turn up and vote. And as Pat said, in Oklahoma, you have access to a rich amount of data that you can get pretty close to identifying that group of folks. And then I'm going to want to know, how is my message being received by them? How are my opponent's messages? What's working, what's not. But I'm not just going to be asking everybody under the sun what they think about the election or who they're planning on voting for, because we know not everybody under the sun will vote. So I'm going to focus on my polling as a candidate on that group of folks I think is most likely to show up and vote in my election. If we're doing issues, you can broaden that out. But even, and I'll ask that, even when we're polling issues, most of the time, we're still not just polling just anybody. We usually are polling at least registered voters, and oftentimes we still poll likely voters as well, which goes back to a point that I like to make with everybody, which is if you don't vote, nobody gives a rip what you think. Candidates aren't going to send you mail, and they're not going to target you in other ways for your vote. Pollsters aren't going to ask you who you plan on voting for. It's just that's who we're looking at. And so, if you want to have the opportunity to give your voice through a public opinion poll or something like that, voting is how you kind of get selected for that. At least initially, you make the first cut by being a voter.
That and jury duty. Go ahead.
I was just going to say to build on what Pat said about the limitations and whether or not consumers are aware of them, and he said they're not, and they're not. But it's twofold. One, we don't necessarily, the media, we should say, doesn't necessarily spend a lot of time explaining the limitations of polls. But part of that is because how many of you have been in a class that started to talk about research methodology? It's okay, raise your hand. You've been in a class that started talking about it, like intro to psych, intro to soc. How many of you, your eyes crossed, they glazed, and you wish desperately that you weren't in that room? Lots of yes. Most people feel like that. And so if you try to get somebody up on, say, a news story to spend 20 minutes talking about why polling is shaky, but you should still rely on it, you lose them. And so what's the point? And so we continue to have this process of people don't understand it, and so if it disagrees with them or it doesn't work out to predict the election, they're just going to discard it, because trying to explain to the average poll consumer the complexities of polling, it's a non-starter.
No, it really is. I mean, it's really difficult there, and I think the most important thing that I wish they would say is polls are a snapshot in time. They're not a predictor of the future, but they can show you direction if you have them on a regular basis. You have the same system put in place, and to me, that's the stage of this election we're in right now. Is what direction are these races heading?
Yeah.
Where are things going? Where are different blocks of voters moving? There are some things there, if you've been doing it as long as I have, that you can look and see. You can look at crosstabs, and you'll generally see, voters that are in households. Right now, we're using over $100,000. That tends to be a little bit predictor of where the rest of the population is going to go in the future. Those who vote, 5 of the last 5 general elections, are ones that will break earlier, generally in an election cycle. And those are the people that everybody else goes, oh, you pay attention to politics, how do I vote? And so they're opinion leaders, and so we pay a little more attention to them right now because that's where everybody else will tend to follow. So that's the utility of the poll at this point in time. It's getting down to the horse race. I mean, the real benefit from a poll was back in February, when you guys were setting this up, and figuring out where these elections should be framed and what they should be done there. And what's tough is during a campaign when you're involved in a campaign, is sticking to what you originally said the framing should be.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, you guys set me up really nicely for question 3. So this one is on state politics. So there have been 2, and 2 more since I wrote this question, so feel free to focus on whatever polling you would like. But the 2 polls conducted by state firms recently, Amber Integrated and Sooner Poll, that show major statewide races within points of one another, including, of course, the gubernatorial race against his state superintendent of public education, again, who I referred to as a dino earlier. Switched parties, right? She ran and won as a Republican and switched parties to run against Stitt, which is, again, kind of a weird event for Oklahoma politics, to say the least. So both of these polls had margins of error above 4.4%. So how trustworthy are the numbers that are out there right now on both the gubernatorial race as well as the state superintendent's race, which shows the Democrats ahead?
What verbiage did you use there the very last thing? Say that again.
Sure. With margins of error above 4.4% in both polls, or 4.4 points in both polls, how trustworthy are these numbers?
Well, I mean, and trustworthy, I think, is the key word there. I mean, it's not predictive.
Sure.
But I think you're seeing things there. The takeaway is that within 1 point, I don't know if that's significant.
Sure.
What we can say is that it's close.
Okay.
And to me, I'll use a recent poll I've got. And I've had one poll that has Hoffmeister ahead by a couple.
Okay.
That was about 2 weeks ago, which some of these came out.
Yeah.
I now have a poll that has stood up 4.
Okay.
But to me, the key takeaway isn't that horse race. The key takeaway is the other questions I ask on the study.
Sure.
For example, I asked if the election for state legislator in your area were held today, would you vote for the Republican or the Democrat? The Republican has a 17-point advantage. I then asked if the race for the U.S. Senate, read through the candidates in the Langford contest. Langford up 17 points, identical to the generic ballot. I do the Mullen versus Kendra Horn. He's up 14, so a little bit narrower. I dig it down to the governor's race, and it's 4. So it tells you there's something different. There is an anomaly here going on. And I hope you guys like this on question wording. The other race that's getting a lot of attention is the race for state superintendent of schools.
Yeah.
What's fascinating for me, if I go my ballot order, the federal races first, then I do the state, and I only do governor and then state superintendent, they're almost identical. If I add in the lieutenant governor's race, corporation commission race, any of the others that are going to be on the ballot differently, then I see that state superintendent race come back to more closer to the, it still doesn't get all the way to generic, but I see the Republican picking up there when you go there. So it's always just the individual question, it's what questions are in between as well. And since anybody here tell me who's running for lieutenant governor other than that for now? No, so the polls that are being sold in the media ones, they're not even asking that question, they're not spending time.
It's a lady with a hyphenated name.
It is, and so, and that is not, and that's one of the actual key things there. I'll tell you, a lady with a hyphenated name brings Republicans back on the Republican side.
Sure.
And so that one in particular is probably going to be the saving grace if Brian Walters ends up winning that race.
Sure.
Is that a woman with a hyphenated name running for lieutenant governor. So it shows you how odd campaigns can be and the things we have to look at when we're designing our surveys.
I think it's interesting. A lot of people don't recognize the little things that can make a difference in how people vote, right? I often talk a lot of times with students and bring up the fact that a candidate that is married and has a family has a distinct advantage, in Oklahoma at least, over a candidate that's single. And what I find amusing is candidates that are single in their advertising will do just about everything they possibly can to make it look like they're not. And sometimes that works for them, sometimes it doesn't. But there are little things that, and Dr. Broder probably can talk about this even better, but that psychologically they trigger something or they say something to us that says, I find this one more trustworthy than this one, or I think this one will do a better job because of X, whether that's, family or name or a myriad of other things.
Well, the stereotypes we have, what goes into political advertising, they're there for a reason. We don't randomly put American flags and babies and families and firefighters in our ads just because we thought, hey, we're bored, we'll just put something new in. They work. And like I said, there's a reason why our advertising can be really, really familiar from cycle to cycle. Because once you figure out the imagery that works, you stick with it. Whether it's faking having a family because you don't have one, or as in the case of some races that weren't in Oklahoma, you get down to bullet-pointed words in your ad, and you don't have to explain anything.
Facial hair hurt you 3 points.
Does it really?
Yeah.
Right.
Does it
It
really?
used to be 6.
Yeah.
Is that why you get rid of the, anyway?
And for those of us who are on the shorter end of the height spectrum, we're at a disadvantage too.
No, you're absolutely correct. That's why in October you start to notice instead of candidates themselves are running in their ads and talking to you. If they have them, it's their wives, right? I've been seeing a ton of Mark Wayne Mullen's wife on my TV screen recently. So, projecting that image of loving wife, doting partner, child, family, all of that good stuff certainly feeds into that psychology. You didn't answer a personal question, a deep, lingering question that I have, however, about margins of error. I want to know. I want to know what is too much in a poll.
Oh, the easy thing to do, if you want a lower margin of error, just decrease your confidence.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, that's what
Lizzie, come back. Are you alive?
to a certain extent, you can decrease your margin of error by better sampling of larger numbers of people.
Okay.
One of the things that inflates your margin of error is small sample size because you can't overcome variability.
Right.
But one of the issues with saying you need a certain margin of error is stepping back from just political polling, but surveys generally. There's a bit of a discrepancy between what the average consumer thinks is an appropriate margin of error and then what you're just realistically going to get when you ask human beings questions that involve their opinions or their attitudes. So sometimes when people say, oh, that's a terrible margin of error, I'm looking at it from a researcher standpoint going, really? Because if I got that on my research, I'd be thrilled.
What I look at is where do the numbers. So again, if Stitt and Hoffmeister are within 3 percentage points,
Sure.
and the margin of error is 4.5, then I know, okay, this is basically a dead heat at this point. If the margin of error is 4.5 and one of the candidates is up by 10, then I think that's probably safer to assume, at least at that point in time, this is where it seems to be where things are headed, right? So I always just look at how are they close enough in how voters are selecting them? Does that fall within the margin of error or not? As a way of telling me, can I think of this poll as telling me what's likely to happen or not? And the fact is, I think most of the polls they're close, and so I don't know that I would be safe saying any of these necessarily going to tell me exactly what's going to happen, but they're telling me whatever happens, it's not going to be a runaway, at least at this point, right? We've got 3 weeks. 4 weeks left. Something could happen to change that.
The news cycles are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. So at one time, you thought, oh, a month out, a campaign can't change. 2 weeks out, a campaign can't change. A week out. Used to the traditional media would kind of unofficial Thursday before the election, no news stories, anything like that. It doesn't matter with as many information sources we have, and people going on their own. That yes, things can change dramatically. I do not think that a survey done today, when you've got 2 candidates, independent expenditures, a lot of resources on both sides, that they're not going to affect. That they don't have the ability to affect and change things. I'd be much more comfortable saying that you're not going to see the U.S. Senate races or some of those change where you don't have that same level of independence.
Excellent. All right, so let's move on to the next section of questions. This is focused on what gets people to the voting booth, so what drives you there. So this question, to what do you attribute the shift from fear to anger-driven motivation in voters, as well as in campaign messaging? And what are the consequences of this shift? So sort of the foundation of this question was looking at kind of early 2000s. We were still kind of in the national security, kind of fear-based, voter motivating factors. And now it seems like political parties and candidates are trying to anger voters, right? Kind of motivation by anger, whether I'm going to the polls to vote against this person. It doesn't seem like it is very altruistic voting or happy voting these days. So that was kind of the foundation for that question.
Well, one, I'm not sure I fully, not being a part of your discussions on the fear to anger. I would say that anger has always been a key component.
Sure.
The maxim that we use at times, and I dislike it. I wish I could fix it. Is that hate's a bigger motivator than love, and we've seen that. It's been used time after time. I remember I have a mailer from a county assessor about how he was going to stop Obamacare. I'm still not certain exactly what that was going to be, but that was on the front lines against the takeover of your right to have a doctor. It, uh, it, it, uh, it is a motivator, and what I do think's happened, and maybe it is getting more intense. Although, go down to the Carl Albert Center, the Football Archives, and look at some of that ads that they've got from decades ago that are pretty mean. But it's about winning who shows up to vote, and we're in a horrible, horrible cycle where this anger uh, uh, decreases. And some would argue that it's a conscious effort to suppress voter turnout. So you can divide and conquer, and you just win those who turn out if you're not popular. You just demonize somebody else more. And so we end up with a system of either the lesser of two evils or the evil of two lessers running an office, and that means fewer people want to go vote, which means, okay, that means the demonization of my opponent is going to be even more effective next cycle, which means fewer people vote. And so, it's a cycle that I'm not sure how we break. And my biggest concern there is the media. We don't have common touch points as much as we used to because everybody uses media now for confirmation, not information. And so we're in a cycle, and I hope there's somebody bright enough in here to help solve that problem because I can't figure it out.
So, I was going to agree with Pat that while there may be a shift in terms of anger and fear, we're certainly not getting rid of fear. What we may be seeing is an increase specifically in resentment and grievance with the anger. There's almost always going to be some anger, but it seems like we've seen quite a bit of an increase in resentment specifically. And so that may be why it stands out more, is the nature of the anger has shifted. But he mentioned that negative has a bigger impact than positive, and that is true outside of politics. That's just true generally. That although we like positivity, we like feeling good, and if you ask people, do you like that positive ad, do you like that negative ad, they're going to like the positive ad generally, but the negative one's going to have a bigger impact. It's much like in a relationship, you can have 10 awesome years with your partner, but your partner commits one major indiscretion, and in the next 10 years, guess which one you're still carrying around? You're still carrying around those negative ones. And getting rid of those negative ones, if you look at some past presidential and gubernatorial campaigns, you sometimes can. Once somebody can hang that around the opponent's neck, the opponent never can quite overcome that. So there's a reason why we keep going back to the negativity well. But part of it is not so much getting people to the polls, as Pat said, keeping them away. Because if you can't get people to like your candidate, it's like the other one the same way.
Yeah, I think it's just part of human nature, right? I mean, if you hear something positive about someone, right, even if it's really positive, how long that sticks with you and how much you think about that is not super long. But if you hear something negative about someone, right, you're more likely to believe it, number one, and you're more likely to share it, number two, right? And listen, the people who run political campaigns are smart people. They understand this, right? They understand that that's just, it's like they say, the bad news travels a lot faster than good news, right? And there's a reason that we talk about sometimes, that term gossip, because gossip is never about something good. It's always about something bad. And so it's just, for some reason, it's hardwired into us that we are more prone to believe and to share bad news.
If it bleeds, it leads.
Right.
Well, and that part's, it's sometimes pretty simple. If you are, prior to, say, modern humanity, if you're out and you miss one thing that's great to eat, you missed one thing that's great to eat. You miss the predator stalking behind you, you don't get a chance to miss something else that's great to eat. You're gone. So, we are hardwired to pay a lot more attention to the negative because sometimes the negative is different. Yeah, it's bad when you miss something good, but again, missing something bad really hurts. So, yeah, we're going to pay attention to it. And with the gossip, I actually just read some research on gossip. I can't believe you brought that Not all gossip is negative, but the majority of it's negative. By the way, did you know that there's a gender difference in how much negativity there is in gossip? Would you like to guess which gender has more negativity in gossip, although most gossip is?
Is it total gossip or percentage of gossip?
It's essentially, if you're doing a gender split on, not on the quantity of gossip, but the proportion of positive to negative gossip.
Oh, I think guys are more negative.
Yep. Yeah, but everybody's more negative than positive, but men do tend to have a higher proportion of negative gossip. Well, I'm trying to remember the last positive gossip I heard at work. I know I heard some, but
Well,
Touche.
whether it's positive or negative may depend on your perspective a little bit too, right?
Sure.
But so listen, this plays out every time we have an election cycle, right? We have lots of polling that says people don't like negative ads, and then we have lots of negative ads being run, and people are like, well, why do they keep running this? We don't like them because they work, because they're effective at moving people. Now, I think there are good sides and bad sides of running negative ads, right? You've got to have something that people are going to respond to that's going to make a difference, for them. And if you pick the wrong thing, it can backfire on you, or it can just be a dud and not move those that you do. And my understanding is now a lot of Pat was saying this earlier about suppressing the vote. A lot of the strategy in running negative ads is not to move people necessarily from Pat to me, but just to get people less inclined to vote for Pat to begin with. And then I do my work to get my voters to turn out.
Right. I think you look at it. You've seen the new ad that the SNP campaign is running right now, tying Joy Hoffmeister to Joe Biden on energy policy. That's not going to make anybody vote. I don't think they expect anybody to go vote for Kevin Stitt because of that. I think they want to make people think, I've got to get the kids to soccer practice. I've got to go do this. I'm not going to go take time because maybe it costs an energy job or something, or I can't vote for Joe Biden even though I don't like Kevin Stitt. And so they're just hoping that narrow sliver of folks decide not to go vote. And when you're in a race that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points, that matters.
essentially, if you're talking about when he was mentioning just tying an unpopular person to a neutral candidate, you don't even have to provide a whole lot of information, especially for people that aren't paying a lot of attention because they're busy, like the person taking their kids to soccer practice. What they're going to remember is not energy policy. What are they going to remember? Biden. And if they don't like Biden, now, Joy Hoffmeister has a Biden picture on her neck.
So you guys kind of led into the next question. So the benefits and drawbacks of negative advertising, which you pretty much touched on, but it's a compound question. So the second part, do voters perceive a difference between negative ads from the campaign versus from dark money ads or political action committees? Do you think that we are nuanced as voters?
No, people don't read disclaimers. I mean, if they do, they don't understand them.
Okay.
And even if they understand them, what do you remember a few days after you read or see something? Source confusion. You remember the message, you may not actually be able to recall anything about who said it. So even if you read the disclaimers, next week if I ask you about that ad, you don't go, hey, I saw this dark money ad. I saw this Hoffmeister ad.
Well, my guess is if we walk outside in a poll here and ask me what dark money was, they couldn't even know.
Yeah.
I pay attention to it, but I'm kind of a nerd that way. So. But the trend, and I'm going to ask this, the trend to me seems to be that candidates in their own campaign spending are trying to stay more positive, especially if there is a independent expenditure out there that's going to go negative for them. Is that, you see that? Now, I know Stitt's campaign came from it, but that just seems to be a trend that I've seen over the last couple of cycles.
One, and I haven't seen it this cycle much, but in recent cycles, one of the worst things you could be called is a negative campaign. And so you try to avoid that and deflect. So it's not that you care who sees it, it's that you don't want to have that label of being a negative campaigner. Because people do hate it, even though it's effective. And so you don't want that label. So that's why that's always the game that's kind of played there. But I'll tell you, I talk to more and more campaigns that are like, we just don't trust other people to deliver the right kind of message, especially if it's out-of-state people, out-of-state consultants at times. that they don't think get their 15% for the media buy, they're just going to slap something up their plate.
Any other thoughts on negative campaigning advertising?
Maybe we should, because I don't know,
Yeah.
just an explanation of what dark, when we talk about dark money, what we're talking about, right? Which is when a candidate raises money and spends it, they have to report who they raised that money from and where they spend it, right? A lot of people don't understand that realistically, campaign fundraising and expenditures are one of the most regulated activities that we have because of the reporting requirements that are involved. Some groups can raise money and spend it advertising for or against a candidate, and depending on how they're structured, they may not have to report where that funding came from to run those ads, right? And that's what we mean by dark money. The transparency level is not there where you can see where did that funding come from.
It also helps people sort of escape limits on how much money that you're going to donate, since a political action committee is not a candidate. They're not running for office. So not only do they not have to necessarily report who gave the money, they don't have to report how much. And if you go back to source confusion, I've run into at least a few people who thought they were donating to someone's candidacy, and they were donating to a political action committee. And they wouldn't remind you because it was their same political affiliation, but they didn't even notice they were doing it, which is probably inattention or just a lack of knowledge of the difference between a candidate and a political action committee.
Yeah, and so there are different types of political action committees, right? So a multi-candidate PAC is one that they're going to take money and they're going to give that to candidate campaigns. Right? That's their design. And there are a lot of PACs like that out there. Those actually do have to report their expenditures and their contributions. All right. So, but then you have these animals called super PACs that they collect a bunch of money. They don't then turn around and spread that out amongst candidates, but they just spend that on advertising, again, either for or against candidates. And those types of organizations have no limits really on what they can spend, but they can't donate strictly to candidates. Right? So it gets really confusing really fast. And even for some of us who are involved in it and pay attention to it, the rules can change and it can still be confusing sometimes.
Well, to me, it's one of the deals that the lifeblood of politics is money, and money is going to find a way to influence campaigns and elections. And so I don't care what kind of restrictions you put on it. Someone smarter than whoever's writing the laws is finding a way to circulate it, circumvent it. And the reality is, I mean, it's at the root of it is, the courts have decided that spending money is free speech, and so the ability to do this is pretty protected in who we are fundamentally. I think most people want to keep some aspect of it there. I would like to see a change where just full transparency of everything you have. We've got to make the world a lot better place. Quit playing games with it. Just give me money.
Second. All right, so last question before I open it up to audience questions. So start please. So throughout the 2020 midterm election in Oklahoma, and we've kind of touched on this before, we've seen a variety of Republican candidates run not on local or state issues, but again on that woke Biden agenda that we were just discussing in relation to Joy Hoffmeister. What explains the shift from issues that are actually impacting folks on the ground to deeply ideological, and tangential issues, or issues that are not maybe actually issues, like critical race theory being taught in schools?
I guess I can go first again.
Go on, you.
No.
Dr. Broker's always ready and willing.
No. I mean, I think part of this goes back to information flow. So
Sure.
why you might not have those concerns here, a lot of Oklahomans see Congresswoman Omar or an AOC or some person progressive / liberal that they don't agree with, and so they want to fight that, and so they try to fight that here in Oklahoma. So I think part of what happens there. I've got survey data dating back to 1978, so the advent of cable news and everything else, and we saw Oklahomans change how they consider themselves on an ideological spectrum as they became more aware of coastal elites and liberals there, where they said, "Oh, that's not who I am. I'm someone different than the ideology." So I think we tap into that. I also think it goes back to the fear and anger issue.
Yeah.
Creating something that people don't like and want to motivate. I will tell you, on these woke issues that you're talking about here, the reality is Republicans shouldn't talk about those now. Those should be primary issues. In fact, I think that's why the Ryan Walters race for state superintendent got so close. He never realized his numbers have improved as he's not out there trying to be on the news talking about transgender bathrooms and pornography in the schools and these kind of things. So, I mean, those are more the primary issues, not general.
Yeah, we've got to motivate people either to show up for us or motivate people to just not show up, and focusing on these more emotionally charged types of issues do that, right? And so, and it's been a long-standing. I mean, I've got campaign literature from decades ago, and it's been a common thing for quite a while to attach an unpopular person, political figure from out of Oklahoma, kind of a national figure, to a candidate in Oklahoma for a state office or something for that very purpose, right? I don't like AOC, therefore I can't vote for someone else who's a Democrat in Oklahoma because I might be supporting that in some way, shape, or form, right? And so it's an easy connection to make, right? Two candidates have D's or two candidates have R's to their name, and if one's unpopular, you just hang it around the neck of the other and go on down the road, so to speak.
Yeah, and I will say both parties do that.
Yeah.
There's no doubt when it gets to motivation, every Republican wants their base to be thinking about Joe Biden when they vote. And there's a Democrat base that wants you to think about Donald Trump.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
And while it's not necessarily new, we have increased the notion recently that all politics should be divisive by party. I live in Norman, and there was an effort not too long ago to make the city council elections, which are nonpartisan, partisan. If they realized they couldn't work because they had to change state law. But they actually basically wanted the candidates to basically have a party affiliation to run for city council. And it didn't work, clearly, because the state said no. But that makes you think about it. Okay, really, did you need that? But it makes it a lot easier to vote if all that you want to do is stick a letter on somebody so everybody can go vote for the R and the D. I mean, I don't know what an anti-wolf dog catcher looks like. But
I'm going to know.
I don't.
Well, to build on that, this is one of my favorite things there. What's hilarious to me kind of about that effort is it was done by the Republican side and the conservative side when they do it. But they would lose every election in Norman if they had those already designations, except for one or two wards.
They would lose 5.
Yeah.
But they would
Everybody
win
else.
5, but they would lose like 1 2 6.
Yeah.
Right.
And so it's for the best that it
From their perspective.
All right, final thoughts, Dr. President?
Oh, I don't want to do that one
I mean, any final thoughts?
I'm going to come back to the discussion of negative ads.
Please.
A lot of people, most people, say they don't like them. But actually, I like negative ads. And I like them because they give me a lot more information than usually the positive. And not just information about whoever the ad's attacking.
No.
But they give me a lot of information about the candidate running them. What do they think is important? What are they emphasizing? Are they emphasizing an issue that is not really related to the office being sought? Are they making a case, an effective case, that this person did something so egregious that I shouldn't vote for them, right? So I feel like I get a lot of information from those negative ads, as much about the candidate running them as about the candidate that's being focused on in the ad. So I kind of like them, and I find them more useful in a variety of ways than, say, just the vanilla, I'm great, I'm awesome, vote for me because I'm going to do X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, elections are about differences, and those help do those. And the reality is, you do it in a sensational way to get people to watch it. That's why yes is low on the ratings.
Yeah, I would say go back to talking about, we mentioned the internet and this democratization, little d democratization of information so that we have so much more of it and the barriers to getting it are incredibly low and source confusion really is a thing. So we just have now this sea of information that people can use to confirm their beliefs, but virtually nobody who's consuming it actually has ever gone through, voluntarily, any kind of training to evaluate the quality of that information. And since we tend to like information that confirms our beliefs, even if those beliefs are hard fears, it can be really hard to work against that. Even just with just a few ads or a whole campaign, when you've got this ocean of information that says, this horrible thing's going to happen, and here's 90 million people you don't know who say it will, even if all the information is complete garbage.
All right, can we give our panel a round of applause? And open it up to the audience. Do we have any questions? Sure.
How do you think polarization of federal politics has affected state engagement?
Tremendously. And well, I'm sorry, that's actually, I think, the goal of the Republican Party and Republican candidates. They want you going into the polling booth thinking about federal and national issues and not Oklahoma. If that happens, again, we've got a very big Republican advantage. And so they're going to continue to tap into that. That absolutely has an impact on the state elections.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Other questions?
Don't be shy.
Battlefield, you don't have a question?
Me?
I'm surprised.
Okay, yes. Well, it looks like,
Yeah, kind of a wonky one, which is you're talking about accessibility to people to answer questions and some of the cycles that has gone through. How do I don't mean the exact formulary, but how do you compensate for the fact that people who answer polls now then are doing it by choice, and so they don't necessarily represent the group of people who just refuse to answer polls? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things that keeps me up at night is worrying about that aspect. But when we are tracking polling and doing things, I think we do a decent job there. The reality is, I think you get people on both extremes that refuse to do polls. But I think it's really about technique and convincing people at the start that you're not trying to disseminate information, you're trying to collect it. And then I think you have more willingness of people all across the spectrum to go ahead and answer those survey questions then if you get past that threshold. And so we just really work and try to do that the best we can. And then we try to get people where they are. We try to give multiple times a day, multiple methods, different ways to do that. There's nothing perfect about it. There is a self-selecting aspect to participating in polling, and we just try to minimize that as best we can. And we eliminate we do eliminate some answer bias and different things like that. We look at gender and age. Older people are much more likely want to vote, and then also more likely to participate. And so we put some controls on things like that.
And the poll results can be weighted by group representation so that you have something that looks a little closer to the population. But I don't think we have a lot of this, and it would be great if we could do it. And if you can think of a way to do it, please tell us. Research on the non-respondents, the people who just won't answer, because there's probably some consistent characteristics there that would be interesting. But if nobody will answer a poll, you're not going to get them to answer a poll about why they didn't answer the poll. I mean, they just hang up.
Although I will say, we do take back our data and our refusals, and we can't really do it for those that don't ever answer the phone. It's a little bit tougher because there's just so much. But we will do analysis on our refusals to profile them against the population we're looking at to see how much they do.
there are some, I guess, depending on where you get the data from, right? There's some information about those folks that you have already, right?
I can tell you if there's a veteran in the house, if they use what fuel they use to heat their house. I mean, we've got 300 different market characteristics we could fill on those.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I have a question. It's really for Mr. McPherson. Dr. Boger mentioned this democratization of materials and the plethora of information that's generally available. And do you, at any point, actively try to figure out why, what kind of information people gravitate to when they give you responses to your polling, or are you just really more interested in the response itself? If that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm not certain. Well, I'll speak to it. I'm not certain I fully understand it. But we always look and see, try to identify information sources where they trust things. Some of you, there used to be a thing called newspapers. That used to be a standard, but it's really just gone by the wayside. And so, I guess it was. I'm old, so people here might not even remember Jon Stewart, but there was one time when the Daily Show was like the number 3 or 4 most trusted news source for politics. We actually I had the Babylon Bee show up on a survey the other day, being on a trusted news site. It's a parody site like the Onion. And so, we often look and see where that information is coming from. But generally, we look for that from mediums, but we really focus on what kind of messages. And lots of times we'll try to get enough of a sample that we can split samples and look at just key words, to see which ones highlight and change one word in a choice form response question. You see, okay, what did we call it gun reform instead of gun control? How's that change how people respond to it? As far as being a top issue.
Any other questions? Christopher?
How much does the candidate from like federal level endorsing a local level candidate affect the potential outcome or viewpoints of a candidate?
Great question. We've just had Jordan Peterson and Ted Cruz was here for another Lakebird, I believe. Great question.
It depends on each race individually. They tend to matter more in primaries because everybody expects all the Republicans or Democrats to endorse their party in the general election. But like, for example, the Ted Cruz endorsement, that's more to do with fundraising than it is actually getting people to turn out to vote and change. People don't like to say endorsements matter, but it's clear they do. And it matters more the lower the level race. The less engaged somebody is in a campaign, the less knowledge they have, the more that can fill that vacuum. And then we can see it really matter. So for local races, for school board, having someone endorse there matters much more than it does for a U.S. Senate race. People are not going to be deciding the U.S. Senate race based on who Ted Cruz endorsed. They might in the primary, but not in the general election. But further down the ballot, it goes. And if they cross across party lines, then it can make a real difference. It could be a different kind of thing. But for example, I'll talk about this. You might have seen the Joy Hoffmeister ad with Brad Henry.
Yeah.
That endorsement, when you probably really expected, I think it's really, really hurt Hoffmeister campaign from the data I've seen. Because the one framing that Joy Hoffmeister should have tried to avoid with every fiber of her being was this being a Republican versus Democrat fight. And so she gets, granted, a popular Democrat out there to say, we're different kinds of Democrats, but we're still saying we're Democrats. And that's a 17-point disadvantage.
Any other questions?
So I have a question. So if there's one piece of advice that you would give to candidates when they're running for office on how to effectively create their message, right? What would that be? What should they be looking at?
I would tell them first, treat your pollster like you do your doctor. You're going to pay professionals, take their advice, listen to them. But besides that, it is to be authentic. Voters smell bullshit a mile away. They really do. And so you've got to be authentic. So it doesn't mean so you have to craft your message and say words that are authentic for who you are, is the one thing to do. And now you can poll test which is the best authentic way to say something. But I think it's got to be authentic about who you are. That's the very first thing I tell them.
All right, last one. You always ask questions. I was going to point you out. I
I'm
was
just
gonna
like
ask.
sitting here thinking like, do I ask this question? Do I ask this question? So I'm just kind of curious how, I guess I don't really know exactly the government works, so I'm confused how something like abortion becomes like re-politicized. Like, do you see in your polls that there's an overwhelming amount of people that are, against abortion? Is that why in Oklahoma we decided to change our direction with that?
Well, times change. Dobbs changed that. Before Dobbs, when the rule of the land was Roe v. Wade, abortion legal, you had intensity, especially among Republican primary voters, to stop the killing of innocent babies. And that was the moral decision that they had. And when you've got something that's in a moral area, moral right and wrong, it's really easy for political figures to manipulate them and motivate them. And it became just vital in the Republican primary. Post-Dobbs, the intensity on abortion is on abortion rights. And so we're seeing that talked about now. It's not Republicans talking about it now. Unless you're in a safe Republican seat or you're just not very bright politically. It's Democrats talking about it as a way to mobilize their base. It's fascinating on this. I don't know if you've seen anything yet. Traditionally in Oklahoma, you'd have a solid 62% that would say they were pro-life on the issue of abortion. And those included people that were pro-life with no exceptions and pro-life with the 3 exceptions of rape and incest. I still have north of 60% in those 2 categories, but now I have almost half of those that are for 3 exceptions characterize themselves as being pro-choice. Because the Republican Party, and especially the Republican Party in Oklahoma, has redefined what pro-life means, that it's not for those 3. It might not even be for contraceptions, or IUDs and things like this. I mean, it's that pro-life message has gone so far that Republicans in this state are starting to lose that issue. So it's a little bit of a side there, but no, it's all about motivating the people out to vote who's going to be talking about it and activating it. I think it has very little to do with policy.
That was excellent. All right, can we give our panel one more round of applause? We've got one more of these on November 3rd. Professor Davenport and I are doing a media politics panel. If his face looks like he does not remember, but we'll be there on November 3rd. So look for information on that. Have a great day, you guys.